And what we look at gender differences within households is because there are three main reasons to think that this pandemic could have differential gender effects on working individuals, and in particular, that working women will be affected more than working men. The reasons to look at this in particular is that first, the largest sectoral impact of the recession has been on the service industry, which has a large share of female employment, unlike previous recessions, which were mainly, typically affect manufacturing or trade or, construction that are more male dominated. The second reason is that due to physical distancing measures, school closures took place since late March. So this has generated an increased need for childcare in American households. And the third reason is that typically mothers do most of the childcare, even in two-parent households, even if they're working. So we know this is a crucial determinant of labor supply for women. So because of these reasons, we looked at gender differences within households and as a consequence of the pandemic in terms of childcare provision, variables related with labor market outcomes like employment and different types of working arrangements. And also we looked at psychological distress as kind of a consequence of these other aspects. And because we are looking at gender differences within the household, we are focusing on adults who are either married or living with a partner. And for a large part of our analysis, we focus on individuals with children. So for our data, we used the Understanding Coronavirus in America survey that Ari already explained. So I'm going to maybe skip that description. It's a tracking survey collected every 2 weeks since the pandemic started. And for the main analysis that I will show you, we use the first 8 waves of the survey collected since March 10th until July 21st. We look at married or partnered individuals ages 18 to 65, and that gives us less than 4,000 respondents. We do, however, have data up until today, so I will show you a preview of some new results that we can get with the most recent data. So first, I'll start with childcare provision in the household and gender differences in this aspect. So one of the aspects that we look at is within the household, who is primarily responsible for providing childcare when the schools are closed. So this question was asked in April and May this year, and then again in September. So here I show you what it looked like in April. And so you see here in the chart that if we look at all parents, then mothers, so you see the females and males, and you have the share of individuals who declare to be the main provider and the share of individuals who declare that their partner is the main provider. And of course, we have other categories where other types of arrangements take place, other people are involved, but I'm not showing that because of time. So what I want you to see here is that women are more likely to be the main providers of childcare in the household, 44% of all mothers versus 13% of all fathers. When we condition on working individuals and we look at working parents, these gender differences are still large and significant. 1 in 3 women was the main childcare provider in April versus 1 in 10 men, 1 in 10 working fathers, sorry. So we look at we want to see what's behind these differences and what other variables are associated with these outcomes. So using the data from March until July, we estimate logistics models to estimate the probability of being the main provider of childcare. That's our first approach. And so what we find after controlling for age, education, geographical region, and a host of other controls, we find that working mothers are 27 percentage points more likely than working fathers to be the main provider of childcare in this period. And on top of that, if a parent is working from home, that means they're 10 percentage points more likely to also be the main provider of childcare. So when we look at the static picture of the household, we see that these are the differences, and this is for working mothers, right? So this is a sizable gender difference in this dimension. And then we look at then what happens during the evolution of the pandemic in terms of, if the mother was not the main provider, or, if a parent was not the main provider of childcare at the beginning, then during all these months, what's the probability of them becoming the main provider of childcare? And so again, we estimate it as our model. And what we find is that working mothers are 17 percentage points more likely than working fathers to become the main providers of childcare in this period. So even if they were not at the beginning of the crisis. And for mothers who kept the same job as they did in March throughout the entire survey, they are 26 percentage points more likely to become the main provider of childcare. So the first fact that we get from this analysis of the data is that mostly mothers have been the responsible for the increased need of childcare during the pandemic. And so this, we wanted to see if this has any consequence for employment, right? But before then, let me show you what this looks like now. So this is fresh data from September, the same graph that I showed you before. And what we see here is that for all parents now, the share of women being the main responsible has gone up from 44 to now 52%. And when you look at working parents, the share of working mothers that are now mainly responsible for providing childcare has gone up to 47%. So almost half of working mothers are now primarily responsible for childcare, as opposed to 1 in 3 in April. And 9% of working fathers are. So these gender differences are becoming larger, if anything. And we need to run the analysis on the fresh data as well. And why this is concerning in terms of the future is because when we look at the kind of schooling that the children are receiving, we see that for only 30% of the households, the children are now going to school in person, and for almost half of the sample, they are exclusively getting their education online. So this means that they're at home and they require more attention from their parents.
Maria,
so
you're just about over, so you've got a few seconds left.
Okay. So let me tell you what we did with the employment, and if I run over my question time, that's fine. I think I'd rather show you the results. So we look at what happens with employment, and we looked at the probability of reducing working hours between March and July for individuals who were still keeping the same job as they did in March. And we see that there's a statistically different gender difference in gender for mothers versus fathers, but it's not statistically different for individuals without children. So mothers are more likely to have to reduce their work hours in this period. And we estimated, the probability of reducing work hours as a function of controls. And we see that this being the main responsible for childcare implies a 20 percentage points increase in the probability of reducing work hours, and a 5 percentage point increase in the probability of transitioning out of employment. So we see that this, the fact that mothers are now the main responsible for childcare during this entire period, and that the schooling situation is not getting better anytime soon, can have, consequences for mothers' career and working women's careers in general. And we have data again on the probability of transitioning out of the labor force. And we see that there are differences in gender here as well. With women, we don't have a lot of people in our sample transitioning out of the labor force, but what we see is that women are more likely than men to do this transition. And lastly, what I wanted to tell you about psychological distress is that when we look at the data, there was a gap in psychological distress that emerged between mothers and women without school-age children in the household in early April. So in general, if you look at this chart, the top two lines are the levels of psychological distress for women, and the two bottom lines are for men. So women have always displayed a higher degree of psychological distress than men, but we see this difference between women with and without children that shows up in April and lasts up until July. And this seems to be driven by women with elementary school age children in the household. However, when we look at the most recent data, this difference seems to have closed. So maybe, you know, we need to figure out what's going on, but maybe this is good news. And so in our ongoing work, as I said, as the schooling crisis persists, we want to study the midterm and long-term effects of these, you know, childcare crisis on working women and their labor market outcomes.